Dr. Michael East. He's the ITC expert.
The ITC is currently implementing the Sri Lanka Trade-Related Assistance Project, funded by the European Union and in collaboration with the government of Sri Lanka. The project strives to contribute to Sri Lanka's inclusive trade-led growth and regional integration, supporting SME export competitiveness and value addition in sectors with high potential for economic growth and development. We are now in the second year of the project, which runs from November 2016 to October 2020. As part of the trade policy component of this project, ITC aims to strengthen institutional capacities to develop and coordinate the design and implementation of coherent domestic reforms, trade policies and trade negotiations.
Today's new initiative focuses on creating Sri Lanka's initial recommendations on key legislative and regulatory priorities for establishing a modernized consumer e-commerce legal framework. This event is launched today while important changes are taking place in the global e-commerce landscape. Last year, global retail e-commerce sales reached $2.29 trillion. This is almost 10% of overall global consumer retail sales in the same year, which was $22 trillion. According to IBM, global e-commerce is growing in a very big way, and about 38% of e-commerce conversions are coming through Facebook. IBM also says that increasing app download to smartphones are another major driver of growth in retail e-commerce. Not only social media referrals to e-commerce is 5% globally, such social media-based commerce accounts for 5% of all online retail spending too. But nearly 70% of global consumers worry their digital payments are unsafe. As for Sri Lanka, we have been ranked high on e-commerce in the top 10 developing and transition economies in East, South and Southeast Asia. This ranking comes from the 2017 UNCTAD Business to Consumer E-Commerce Index report. Sri Lanka's overall rank in this report is 73 out of 144 countries. The New York-based internet research firm Statistica estimates 25% of Sri Lankans are using all types of social media, including Facebook.
That help foster and facilitate e-commerce, and even more, I think, recognizing that this kind of framework that we have assembled today, one in which we get voices coming from government, from civil society, from the business community and the startup community, that's precisely the right place to go. To have that kind of, to have the public-private dialogue on these issues, a true multi-stakeholder approach to e-commerce, I think is really the right way to address and try to address these challenges. So, you're going to be hearing a lot from me over the next few days. I think I have 6 of these presentations, along with the opportunity to engage in some group discussions and facilitation that we'll have a little bit later in the event. But what I wanted to do and was asked to try to do with this first discussion is very briefly try to highlight some of the objectives of where we're hoping that the next couple of days will take us. And I will start by noting that we are not starting from ground zero here. When people talked for many years about electronic commerce and the legal frameworks, as we just heard, very often the starting point was to craft e-commerce legislation or transaction rules that provided some amount of contractual certainty. And Sri Lanka has done that with its Electronic Transactions Act, both the original version as well as one that was updated just last year. As you may know as well, Sri Lanka just entered into a free trade agreement with Singapore. The full text of that agreement has yet to be released, but but certainly I, and I think many others, noted with interest the discussion and the press releases around that agreement that now includes a specific chapter on digital trade and electronic commerce. And while we don't have the full text of the agreement, on the supposition that it largely follows similar frameworks in other trade agreements, for example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that includes many countries from the general region, it's going to have a profound impact, both on what the frameworks may look like, as well as some of the restrictions from a regulatory perspective, and we'll have a chance to get to that as well. As you heard, there is room to grow, but it is a market that is growing. And as we see faster and faster adoption of mobile technologies, of internet access, with that too, and this is something that is replicated in countries around the world, we also see e-commerce and online sales growing. So I think there is unquestionably much work to be done, both within the context of what we're going to try to do over the next couple of days, as well as more broadly in terms of our goals. But it's important to recognize that there has been real work done as well. This is an environment, a marketplace that is growing incredibly quickly. I can tell you, I can recall that I was talking earlier about my previous involvement with ITC. My day job is as a law professor at the University of Ottawa, where I hold the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law. And I remember dating back to the World Summit on the Information Society, which took place about 10 years ago. And as part of that WISIS process that brought together countries from around the world talking about what an information society might look like, we talked about the desire to reach 1 billion internet users and began to think about what would it be like when we brought the next billion over. Well, now we stand at more than 3.5 billion internet users, and sometime this year we are likely to cross the 4 billion user mark across the planet. This is truly ubiquitous technology and communications tools for now the majority of people who live in all communities. And that growth we see not just on a global stage, but we see it here, of course, in Sri Lanka as well. It's notable to see the growth. If you take a look at this particular chart, we see it happening not just in terms of broadband internet use in the home, but of course mobile technologies, mobile subscriptions, playing an incredibly important role here as well. And when you see people moving towards internet use, you say that you find sales come alongside with growth on a global basis, even just at the consumer level, right, ranking in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And once you include business to business, that number moves into the trillions of dollars. We are truly talking increasingly not just of e-commerce, but commerce more generally being integral from an electronic perspective. And I will emphasize this more in our next session when we talk about the broad range of activities that take place. This slide, unfortunately, is a little bit difficult to see, but what it seeks to suggest is that we see growth taking place in an incredibly wide array of activities. We aren't just talking about sale of goods. We're talking in many instances about services, about travel and tourism. We are talking about electronic commerce having a profound impact from a commercial perspective on just a wide range of almost all commercial activities. Now, as you heard, Sri Lanka still represents a relatively small piece of that global puzzle. This is coming from 2015, so the numbers continue to grow. Sri Lanka is down there at the end, and it's small. It's small in part because the marketplace is small. I share that with you as well. In Canada, we often take a look at where we stand and compare it to the United States, and we're a small country, not geographically, of course, but from a population perspective, small relative to our neighbors to the south. But it's also smaller because there is still a lot of room to grow and things to develop, and part of that is, as we've been discussing, the legal frameworks. Now, what we hope to achieve over the next few days is to try to chart a roadmap for how, in a sense, we move along this chain and that circle becomes bigger and bigger. Now, I have to caution that laws and regulations are not the only solution to this. The notion that somehow if you build the appropriate laws and regulations, then suddenly e-commerce will blossom and grow, I think is a bit of a misnomer. I think it is an essential ingredient. I think it is difficult to grow without those rules, but it will take more than just rules and regulations to ensure that Sri Lanka enjoys the kind of successes that it envisions from an e-commerce perspective. And so this roadmap, as I've mentioned, by necessity involves all the stakeholders. It isn't just a solution for government to come and solve and say, here's your regulations. It is essential to hear from consumers, to recognize the consumer needs, and it is essential to involve the business community itself, who on the ground, day to day, recognize some of the challenges that they face and can better identify what kinds of regulations might help foster and facilitate e-commerce. Now, the kinds of rules and issues that we're going to discuss are vast. There's e-commerce transactions, to be sure, and of course, in an event organized by the Consumer Affairs Authority on World Consumer Day, consumer rights and redress are of critical importance. But it won't stop there. We're going to talk a little bit later about privacy rules, where data and personal information is increasingly one of the core aspects of e-commerce, and where rules there play an essential role in building confidence for consumers to be willing to provide their personal information, knowing that it's appropriately protected. There are network issues, such as network neutrality, jurisdictional questions, such as whose laws apply, and how can you effectively ensure that your local laws will be applied into this vast online environment. There's marketing-related issues, questions around spam or electronic marketing more generally, and as the minister mentioned, there is also questions around payment providers and ensuring that we have a payment system here that will allow people to quickly, easily, and efficiently engage in some of these online transactions. So there's a lot of issues to focus on. The objectives coming out of bringing together those stakeholders and looking at those issues, from my perspective, are three. The first, to gain a better understanding of both the opportunities that e-commerce presents, as well as some of the barriers that are currently faced in this market, especially from a legal and regulatory perspective. Secondly, a better understanding of where Sri Lanka stands today, both domestically and in comparison to the global marketplace. And then finally, trying to build all of that together to help craft a roadmap for the future, identifying the kinds of legal and regulatory reforms that will help facilitate electronic commerce and ensure that this country enjoys the many benefits, whether from a business perspective, a government perspective, or a consumer perspective, that e-commerce may bring. So I'm incredibly excited about the next couple of days, the discussion, and I hope it really is a discussion and dialogue amongst us all about these opportunities and barriers. Thanks very much.